We are live.
Ow.
Welcome to another edition of Spring Office Hours. This is episode number 8. We're talking about SpringOne Tour Seattle and a few things that we learned there. And we have some other things to kind of run through as far as new releases go and demos. With me, as always, my friend, my coworker, DaShaun. How are you this morning?
I am wonderful. Wonderful-ish.
Wonderful.
I'm getting there.
Getting there.
The momentum is
Tuesday.
building. I can feel it building inside. Kind of
It's
like
good to be home.
Boot 3. I can feel it. It's coming.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
It is. It's always good to be home after a week on the road.
What a fun week.
I like traveling a lot. I love it, actually. But for small doses. You're just living out of a hotel room and not having a home cooked meal and not having familiar surroundings, especially when you want to do some work. It's tough. So small doses, get me out on the road and then get me back home.
Deal. I like that too. Yeah. Small doses. I'll take that. I'll agree with you 100% on that. Small doses.
Yep.
So what did you learn? What did you learn? You said we learned a few things. What did you learn in Seattle?
Oh man, I learned a lot. What really kind of stuck out to me? I'll let you go first. Let me pull up my notes here because I did have some notes.
The things that I learned the most or that I heard the most, talking with, a lot of our partners, different large corporations, and then also a lot of the Spring team and our team. The idea of what's the right way to do configuration. This is still a big question. And there's tons of ways to do it. And yeah, that's a big concern. What are we doing as we develop out on the edge, as we're moving things towards Kubernetes? Where should we put our configuration? What's the right way to do it? Our good friend Adib did a great talk on taking things to the cloud and scaling out to the cloud. And he's also doing a lot of really, really cool work. I watched his enlightening on security, and I'm learning a bunch on what's the right way to do. So I'm still trying to figure it out. But before I figure out like my go to production way, I want to make sure that everybody understands the way to get started. So we'll talk about that later.
Cool. For me, so I ended up giving a talk on TestContainers. I was originally going to be one half of this talk. So it was going to be 40 minutes long. I was going to do 20-minute demo, and our good friend and coworker Cora was going to do the other half. And unfortunately, she couldn't make it to Seattle. So I ended up at the last minute having to do the whole thing, which was fine because I already had Cora's slides and I just kind of went off of what she had already created. So it wasn't a whole lot of extra work for me. But that was the only testing talk we had at this stop. And because you were there with me, we had 15 minutes of questions after the session.
Best Q&A session that we've had on the SpringOne Tour so far.
Yeah.
For any session.
And what's more impressive is it was lunchtime. So people chose to stay and ask questions instead of go eat lunch, which I don't know if I would have made that choice. I probably would have ran for lunch.
There's good questions. There's good conversation. Yeah. I would awesome. I did. I skipped lunch.
Yeah. And then I think what I took from that the most, and what I got some feedback, and it wasn't surprising because I have the same feelings, is that I had a slide in there that said we have to make the right thing to do the easy thing to do, because if you don't, you're not going to do it. If testing is hard, if it's not something that you can maintain, if it's not readable, if it's not fast, if you don't get that immediate feedback loop, I'll write those tests later. And we never write those tests later. And so, the feedback that I got that I already knew was, hey, this was great, but in general, I don't know what to test, when to test, how to test. I read some tutorials or I watch some tutorials and I just kind of mimic those and hopefully that's a good testing strategy. And we know it's not. So there's I've been thinking about that basically since I left Seattle, and as we march towards SpringOne, and we have some things that we'll be able to talk about probably the end of this month that we're doing at SpringOne. But that's really what I wanted to focus on the rest of the year as far as content goes. It's like when I have the time, how can we make testing more approachable? How can we clean up if I Google something, how to test this in Spring, there's not 50 million different results, and there's all these annotations in Spring. Like, how do I know what I should be testing and when? And so that's my biggest takeaway. And I know you had the same kind of aha, like, yeah, we need to fix that.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. That was a great conversation. And yeah, it definitely has stayed in my mind quite a bit. What else?
Yeah, and for anyone who's out there, we'll work on some more test containers content. I'll get some stuff going on that. But I think, I mentioned this in the Q&A afterwards too, is there's this kind of like pyramid of testing, right? Like you have your unit tests at the bottom because they're fast, you get immediate feedback, and those are the kind of first place to start. Then you have your integration tests, then you have your end-to-end tests. Traditionally, we've written more unit tests at the bottom and worked our way up, right? And I think with things like containers and projects like test containers, I'm more inclined to write integration tests. Like, why mock out something for a unit test? I know why we did that in the past. Again, that fast feedback loop. But test containers is like really fast. And like, why would I want to mock something out? Like, let me just get that immediate feedback of like, is my app, my real app, doing what it's supposed to be doing against what we're going to be using in production, which is say a Postgres database, right? So I feel like those times are kind of changing. These tools that we have are changing that pyramid. And so I don't know, like, I want to get some feedback from the community and see if I'm right there. So we got to find a way to kind of maybe ask those questions and see if we can get some feedback on that.
Yeah, one of the questions that came up was test slices.
Mm-hmm.
When do we use those? Like, how are we supposed to do those?
What is that? Yeah.
I want to just test my database interactions, something like test containers. I want to just test my RESTful endpoints. What am I supposed to do? And to be honest, I've done it so many different ways. I don't know what's like a good model. Like, where's the box? Hey, you should do these tests this way. You should do these tests this way. Yep. I've also seen where not everybody's doing microservices. And even when you're doing microservices, I've worked in large corporations where all of the database interaction is composed into a library. Mm-hmm. So all of your queries, they're in a library. They might be scripted with something. Oh, I can't even think of the name. Where Flyway, no, not Hibernate. What's the other ORM? MyBetas, right? Where you can have all of your queries are in, they're not codified. They're your queries, your strings, so that your DBAs can have more involvement. But all of that interaction is separate from your microservice, so that everybody's using them the same way. And you can have different layers. You have your different splits that way. So your slices, when you're running your tests, you don't need to stand up a full context. In that case, if it's in a separate library, all you need to do is set up that database interaction. And that's one of those things that you can do.
I even in my GraphQL talk, I introduced the GraphQL has a GraphQL slice test. And I said, is anybody doing slice testing in Spring in general? And I think one or two people's hands went up. Okay, this is, we need to like educate more on this, because again, if you in the little demos that we create, not a big deal. But when you get into production grade apps that have hundreds or thousands of classes, like you don't want an application context spinning up for that in a test. Because like I said, you will go, this takes too long, I'll write this later, you'll never write it. So.
Yeah, and you just made me think of a new way to maybe approach this. So yeah, great. Wonderful. We're doing stuff. I'm going to change some things on my side already.
All right. I got a good comment already from Galloway. I think that depends on the architecture. If we speak about a monolith, the test pyramid is fine. If we think about microservices, then the honeycomb approach is way better. And that's true. Yeah, architecture of the application does matter. Absolutely does. So
Great.
maybe we'll think about that when putting some of this content together. As in, like, okay, if you're on a monolith, let's take this approach. Well, we can actually introduce kind of the tools to test first, the different annotations, the different tests you would write, and then say, all right, now that you know the semantics and the tools that you have at your disposal, let's take a look at your application first. So, great comment.
And yeah, one of the things somewhere along the line, it was either, I think it was Marcin, where if I have an application, even a monolith, and I want to write one test, hey, you get to write one test. What's the test that you're going to write? Is it going to be a unit test, or is it going to be some sort of end-to-end or smoke test?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
what's going to give you the most value?
For sure.
So that I try to put the time to value or keep that time to value in mind. But there's a difference. If I'm doing test-driven development, those kind of things, they come with it, right? Those are included as you're doing your development. Sorry, I still have a little bit of the stuff.
No worries. Cool. All right. So I think we can go ahead and share. I'm going to share my screen, and don't close that one, Dan. That would have closed down our stream. Let's go ahead and add this one to the stream, and here we are at calendar.spring.io,
Yes.
our favorite place for Spring office hours. A chance to kind of look at what's happening this week as far as releases go. We are on Tuesday the 19th here. You can see some things happened yesterday with Kafka, RESTdocs, Spring Security. We see a lot of milestones there, like Spring Security 6. Starting that march towards Spring Boot 3 and Spring Framework 6 down the road, which we're excited about. We have Spring integration. And then we have some exciting things tomorrow happening that caught my eye. So Spring GraphQL 1.0.1 is coming. That, I went ahead and looked at the changelog for that. That is really just a bunch of bug fixes and some documentation updates. So again, you can look at the kind of list of issues for that release and see if there's anything in there that kind of needs your attention. And then also 1.1.0/milestone 1 is being released at the same time. And so I had a chance to look at that, and that first release basically bumps us up to Java 17 and Jakarta, whatever one Spring 6 is on, I think 9. So it brings us up to Jakarta. So I asked the question to the GraphQL team, and they said, hey, does that mean the 1.1.x line is basically going to line up with Spring Boot 3? And they said, yeah. So that first one just bumps those up, but there'll be more milestones. They'll need to update auto configuration for Spring Boot 3. So basically the 1.0 line is for 2.7. The 1.1.0x line is going to be for Spring Boot 3. So that starts tomorrow, which is nice. Speaking of Spring Boot 3, Milestone 4 comes out on Thursday. So that's exciting. We have some patch releases on. Yeah.
It feels like Milestone 3 was just like yesterday.
Yeah, I know. And I don't want to, I have to look. I haven't looked at the release notes for Milestone 4, but I believe a lot of that Spring Native stuff is going to be there, and it should be mostly done at this point.
We have in there. Yep.
Now I know that obviously we'll find things, and Milestone 5 will probably clean some of those up. But I think this is the start of, hey, you don't need to pull in a dependency anymore. I could be wrong, but I think that's where we are.
Everything in Spring Boot 3, you do not have to pull in Spring Native dependency.
Okay, cool. Good to know.
The native profile, I could go over that today.
Okay, that'd be cool. Yeah, because anytime we do a demo before 3 and we want to use Spring, we have to say, hey, from the initializer, go ahead and add that dependency. In Spring Boot 3, we'll no longer have to do that. So that's cool. Yeah. Spring Kafka, Spring Boot Data Geode.
Yep.
I'm not sure what that is.
That's Greenplum. That's the open source open source package from Greenplum. So
Nice.
it is a NoSQL database. It is super powerful, and
Cool.
yeah, you can do a lot of really cool things with it.
Cool. So a lot of interesting releases this week. Anything else you'd kind of like to talk about there?
No, I want to get into demos. I want to get into talking about how we do Spring development. And
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Do you want to kick us off then?
Yeah, I will. Here, let me
right.
grab a screen.
Right. Then what we'll do is you can go ahead and run through a demo. We'll come back. I have a couple things to talk about, and then that'll kind of kick us into the demo that I want to get into. So,
all right, let's do that. Hey, am I sharing my screen? Yeah.
Yeah. Let me go ahead and add it, and there you go.
And I'm gonna create a quick project here. I'm gonna start with 271. I'm gonna do a quick demo, and I'm gonna add config server here. That's it. Actually, no, I can't. I have a hard time creating anything without the actuator. So sorry. So that's it. Let's go ahead and generate that. Cool. Let's just replace demo. And let's do this. And get up and running. Hopefully. Somewhere. There we go. All I did was grab config server and actuator. And what I'm going to do first is I'm going to talk about config server. And when I am doing an application, what I like to do is be able to configure it differently for my laptop, for your laptop. And one of those things that we've got is config server. It's a nice little tool. In order to run a config server, I just need to add one annotation. Enable config server. So I'm not going to go super deep. I'm going to do two things. I want to look here. I want to look at my POM. I didn't add native, so let's do that again. Or no, I won't. Let's just say, hey, this is 2.17. I didn't ever 2.7.1. I didn't add native, so I don't have a native profile, and that's okay. I've got this little tool that allows me to do that. Arrow, Azure, and I can add that native profile in case I forgot it. Cool. Now I have a native profile. I updated my POM. Not a big deal. So that now I have a native profile. Same thing I would get if I added it here. Okay, there's the native profile, or that's Spring Native. But what I want to do is I want to show a couple of things real quick. I'm just going to start this nv nw that. This will take a couple seconds. I believe it'll start on port 8080, which, maybe I broke something already with my profile. Oh, it says, hey, I need some stuff. Error creating the bean. You need to configure a URI for the Git repository. That's excellent. The other thing I like to do is I like to run things with properties. How do you configure the configuration server? Let's do a new. How? I use envrc, which is end is the project. It allows me to configure things inside of each project that I'm running. So here you'll see it says, hey, it's blocked during V. You changed your configs. So let's do during V allow. Now I've got a server port and a Spring Cloud config server get URI. So the convention here is if I have environment variables, uppercase separated by the underscore, it's the same as doing a property file spring dot or server dot port equals 8888 and spring dot cloud dot config dot server dot get dot URL equals blah blah blah. Same. But there's a difference here. And this is just one of the things that I've learned along the way. This is one of those conventions that I like to follow. If I want to give this project to you, I don't want you to have to go in and edit this. I would prefer that you can use the same build that I do, and you can just provide it environment variables. So you can have a .envrc in your file. And what I would do is add this .envrc to my ignores so that you have your own .envrc. And I do. So we can have different ports. We can have different configs. We can point at different Git repositories when we're doing our application. So now let's try that again. Assignment's going to start on 8088, and it's got a Git repo on the back end. So we're up and running. And from there, this is externalizing those configurations. So again, some way we have to config the config server, and that's what I'm doing here with my envrc. But for the rest of those, let's go out to this URL and take a look. That's my external, oops, my external configuration. There you go. Cool. And I can set up configurations for my different applications. I can have configurations for all my applications where everybody gets the same config, or I can separate it out for profiles. Tons of ways to do it. The bottom line is I want those configurations to be externalized, and Spring Cloud Config Server is one way to support that in your applications. So you could still do the environment variables, etc. But when you want to have things that are versioned and releasable, auditable, it's nice to have those externalized in something like a Git repo. So that's the first thing that I want to talk about. It's just like, hey, here's what we're doing. I wanted to show this example of using an envrc to provide those environment variables to configure something. I want to talk about config server. I'll show examples of that later. But then we also talked about the differences. Here, if I wanted to make this a native application.
So real quick, before we move on to native, just another big plus of moving that out to, a Git repository is now we don't need to rebuild the entire application to change configuration.
Correct.
You can use things like refresh scope. And so as we change configuration over in Git somewhere, we check that in, that will update our application. So no more of how long that takes to build and package and release, we can change that stuff live on demand and have that take effect right away. So cool stuff for sure.
So in order to make that native, what I would have to do is I'd have to use the P native profile in order to get my AOT. That's where they live. That native profile has the boot plugin that's going to do the repackaging using the AOT Maven plugin. It also, they're both using the build pack. I wonder if that get updated by my tool. I don't see where I'm using it. But we're going to do it the other way now. So that was with 2.7. I would have to use the native profile. So let's close that. Let's go do another application, except let's change it to milestone 3. This time, you'll see that I don't think I can even add the native profile. It says, hey, you got to be cool. This isn't going to work. We already got you. So let's generate that. And let's just replace demo. Yep. We'll do the same thing. or actually, the new one. This is 3. Do I need to? Oh, yeah. Let me open it real quick. So now the difference here is I don't have a native profile. Downloading dependencies, but I'm going to jump over here and kind of short circuit that a little bit. And I'm going to say mvnw clean spring boot run. I didn't add my annotation. I'll do the same thing. No config server. I'm going to add my configurations. And we'll copy. Cool. Oh, I gotta do one more thing. I'm going to say, oh, I already did it. Cool. Now, mvnw spring boot run tests. Same thing. So here I'm just showing nothing else has changed. If I grab Spring Boot 3 and I grab Spring Boot 2.7.1, same thing. You'll notice off the top there was some performance and speed, but everything else, it's pretty much the same. Same annotation. Things are going to work. It's baseline Java 17. But now we want to go faster. We want to do more. We want to make it native. The only difference here is I don't have to bring in Spring Native, but I still get P native. That native profile is still there. So let's just do clean package. And we'll see that that native profile is still there, and it's going to go in, and now it's going to use GraalVM to build that. What we'll do. Key properties. I'm missing something. All right, so I missed something, but I'm going to leave it there and say that that native profile is there. We get that out of the box. I hadn't done this demo before, but yeah, that's what we're trying to do. The native profile gets pulled in by that parent POM.
Cool. Yeah, and I think you know what is happening in a lot of these milestones too is just bringing all the projects up to be native compatible, right? Like that was the huge effort in Spring Boot 3. And so as we get more milestones, more and more things should just work right out of the box, which is awesome.
Yeah, and the thing is that I know with config server is one of those that with 2.7.1, it's one that we get out of the box that's already working with Spring Native. I hadn't done that example, so I'll circle back and I'll make that available later. But yeah, that config server works, and more things are coming.
Cool. All right. Well, like I said, I had a bunch of things we can kind of chat about today, and then I have a little demo as well. But if you are watching, you have questions, that's what we're here for. DaShaun, what do you say at the dinner table?
If you leave hungry, that's your fault. Bring your questions.
True.
Right. If you're here, you've got a question you don't ask before we leave, that's your fault. You can ask it later, of course. We're not going to make you go to bed hungry, but we want your questions. Tell us what you're working on.
Yep. All right. So what I want to talk about first, the Tanzu Developer Center. We are making an effort to get a lot more content over here. So I encourage you to frequent this often. A lot of free stuff here. If you go to the Tanzu Developer Center and go over to Learn and go to Blog, you'll see a lot of our content over here. I just wanted to mention a couple things. Josh is doing a Kubernetes native Java Redux talk, I think tomorrow on YouTube, where it's a premiere. So go ahead and you can get notified when that goes live. And then he also did a podcast with a couple coworkers of ours. So the first one is with Nate Shuda. So there's a good podcast episode with Nate, and as well as with Lee. So a couple really great podcast episodes to check out.
And I think if you go down a little further, I think there's somebody else you might recognize. If you scroll down a little.
Yeah, let's see. Is it Cora? Oh, it's Dan. It's me.
Dan, there it is.
Yeah, I guess we haven't been on since I've done that. So yes, so I was also on the podcast. Oh, today's the last day to submit for SpringOne.
That was a long
We
time
are
ago.
already, we are already in full swing of going through those. God, I'm so excited for SpringOne.
It's going to be amazing.
It's going to be really awesome.
It's gonna be amazing.
So that's the blog. Again, just a whole bunch of free stuff. Who doesn't like free stuff? I'm not being asked to push this to you. I'm just telling you this because there's a lot of free stuff here. Check it out, TNZ Developer Center. Another thing I'm really excited about is I tweeted this out. Again, if you are on Twitter, what are you waiting for? Follow us at @TheRealDanVega, what are you at DaShaun?
At DaShaun.
At DaShaun? I know you are at DaShaun on GitHub, so I didn't know that.
Yep.
I didn't realize that was your Twitter handle too.
On
Man, you
LinkedIn,
got in early.
GitHub, on GitLab, at all the places except for Twitch.
Good. You're good. All right, so follow us on Twitter. I posted this. The DevNexus recordings are up on YouTube. So, that happened a couple months ago. All of these videos are up, and I can't tell you how many amazing talks there are. I just like scanning through there going, yep, I want to watch that one. I want to watch that one. And wow, there were just so many great speakers there. So I can't wait to go through and watch some of these. They just went up last night, so go ahead and check that out.
So much. I'm going to say one thing. For a long time in my career, I didn't get to go to the big conferences. I didn't get to do all the stuff. And I was absorbing as fast as I could the stuff that I would find online, on YouTube, etc.
Yeah.
And also, for my entire career, I always sat down that kind of fear to fail, that I got to go and get this done. I always had this vision of people standing behind me, my competition, however you want to call that. I imagined them going towards the same goals, trying to beat me to where I was going. And that was kind of my driving factor.
Yeah.
These conferences, if you're a person that does that too, everybody that was at that conference, they have all this cool information before you do. So you are behind all those cool things. Everybody else that was there, they got it. You've got to go and get it. You've got to go and watch it so that you can catch up, so you can see where things are going. The faster you do it, the better.
It's so true. It's like a book. I just don't understand people who don't want to read a book. Like, somebody has been doing this thing for 20 years of their life, and they put it into a book for you to like absorb. And like, that's all you gotta do is read a book, and you get the knowledge of this person's 20-year career. And the same thing goes into these conference talks. Some of these people have been doing it 20, 30 years. Maybe they haven't been doing this one thing that long, but they have a vast amount of knowledge. And all you gotta do is soak it up, take it in, and then apply it somehow.
And the reading a book analogy. Sometimes it's okay to read a book more than once. Sometimes you read it the second time, you get a little bit different outcomes.
Sure.
You get a little bit of takeaways. So yeah, we're always learning. And I think that's a consistent thing. And that's why one of the reasons we're doing this office hours, everybody's got to keep learning in order to keep up. And that's what we're trying to help. Yep. Keep learning.
Look at these trending topics here. Kubernetes, VMware, and DaShaun's annual salary here.
Whoa. Hey, boy.
Look at that. All right. Okay, moving on. So moving on. I write a newsletter, a little shameless plug. If you want to sign up, it's free. I talked about Seattle. DaShaun and I saw each other in the Space Needle. We were there. My family was actually there with me. Look at the view of the water. You could see the mountains in the very back. I mean, Seattle was absolutely gorgeous. Really good. My first time there, so that was a really fun trip.
It was.
I talked about I did a talk on GraphQL and test containers. I want to talk about what's coming up next week. I'm going to be at Code on the Beach in Atlantic Beach, Florida. As I say in here, I'll be honest, I can get used to trips to Florida to talk about code and spend time on the beach. That's never going to get old for me. My talk is on full stack Java development with Spring Boot. And I'll bring this up now because I wanted to chat with you about it. And I have a bunch, my first kind of intro to this talk next week is let's talk about what a full stack developer is. Because there's a lot, depending on who you ask, you're going to get a lot of different answers. Some along the lines of what I'm thinking, some along the lines of full stack developers are a scam, something companies made up to get one person into two different roles, and then there's like a whole bunch of like in betweens. So I'm going to talk about just really quickly. This is kind of selfish because again, I have a talk coming up and I want to get some feedback on where I'm thinking and what everybody else thinks. So to me, it starts with the word developer, right? We want to qualify this person as a developer. We're saying they write code. I know that being a developer today, there's much more than writing code, right? There's a lot of soft skills involved, working well with others. I'm going to push that to the side for a moment and just kind of focus on like the code aspect of it. When it comes to writing code, I believe that a full stack developer is some individual that works on both the front end and the back end of a stack. So stack means like the entire application that we are working on. There are different types of stacks. In the general sense of things that I've worked on, this could be a web application. So a web application has a client. This client, most of the time, written in something like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Those are three very broad buckets. There are a lot of things to learn in those buckets. I get that, but I'm just kind of painting that as like a broad stroke, right? In the JavaScript bucket, there's even more. There's frameworks, there's build tools, there's a whole universe around JavaScript. So I think that's from a front end, that's kind of what you should know. When it comes to a back end, you would have experience in, say, a programming language like Java, build tools like Maven and Gradle, a framework like Spring, being able to work with databases. This could be relational or NoSQL. Again, those are kind of broad buckets. I'm going to go a little bit more in depth at the talk. But for me, that's what a full stack developer is. Where I get pushback. Oh, go ahead.
Great talk. No, great. Keep going.
Okay. Where I get pushback is when we talk about DevOps. So does this individual understand the deployment process? Do they understand containers? Do they understand Docker, scripting, CI/CD, everything that kind of goes into the DevOps world? For the longest time in my career, I was I guess you would call it a full, I remember being a full stack developer when it was like, I just needed to know HTML, CSS, and like Cold Fusion, some server-side language that produced everything, right? So, and I kind of ignored all the DevOpsy stuff. I was just never in charge of that. But today, I believe you should have some understanding of it and at least know like, okay, if we're going to write this application, where are we deploying it to? How is it getting deployed? You may not be responsible for it, but it's good to understand those things. But I don't include that, like, you need to know all these things to be a full stack developer. And that's where, depending on who you ask, you'll probably get some different answers. So I'm curious to know what your thoughts are on a full stack developer and what their responsibilities are.
My definition of a full stack developer is a developer that can take some stack from nuts to bolts to production. So whether you're deploying on a VM or bare metal or a Raspberry Pi, you need to know how to deploy it and take care of it. Because I don't stop at just the database and being able to talk to the database. You got to be able to deploy. So my version of full stack is how to get something to production on a stack, right? So full stack could be, like you said, let's call it a Raspberry Pi running Cold Fusion. You know how to deploy the database. You know how to deploy the application. It could be anything on the front end, but I do think that you need to know some front end, but it could be straight HTML. It could be a React. It could be whatever. But mobile, I feel like that's a different case. So
stack, yeah,
have some way of getting the thing to production into your customers where they're going to be. So have a stack.
And this is what I put in here. I said, personally, I think it's nice to understand some of that, but as a requirement, it probably depends on your position and the company you work for, because your job might be to check in code, and somebody else set up this automation, whether it's GitHub Actions or Jenkins or something, to say, now we're going to take that code and make a deployable asset and push it where it needs to go, and you're not in charge of that. So it really depends on where you're working, I guess.
Yeah. We talk about doing make it work first, right? And there are a lot of things that are developed and valuable, and they're being maintained and supported by just one person. Yeah. Right. The entire internet is held up by duct tape and these libraries that one lone maintainer has been working on for years. Right.
Yep.
And there's a lot of that. So you don't have to have all the DevOpsy stuff if it's just you, right? If you don't have to have the containerized workloads if you're deploying to a Raspberry Pi and that's your production, or if you're deploying on the edge, right? And that's your device, right? There's a ton of different ways of getting things done, and one stack isn't the right stack, but have one, I think, is a really good idea. Have a stack that you're comfortable deploying to, so you can understand those concepts.
Yep, for sure.
Yeah, but I think that's
and I like what you said, like understanding how to get to production. So if I'm working on my own and I'm working on like a side project, how do I get that into production? That may be very different, like you said, than the company you work for, where things are getting containerized and running on Kubernetes. You don't need to worry about that in your solo project, but that may happen on the company side. So just, that feeling of getting something out there, you should experience at some point, because it's a good feeling.
I would be curious. You're familiar with the concept of dynamic DNS, where I'm going to stand up something in my home, and it's going to say, oh yeah, here's my IP address. Give me a dynamic DNS, so that you can say, oh yeah, here, and you open up a port so that you can talk to your device or your app or whatever it is. I would be curious to know how many things are running in production for how many hundreds of thousands, I imagine, companies off of things like dynamic DNS. They don't have anything further than some dynamic DNS pointing to their stuff, and maybe a CNAME even. I'd imagine there are tons and tons of that out in production running right now, where they didn't need to know how to do global load balancing, right? But they're stacked, they're in production, they're serving a purpose. Oh, so there's so many things we can talk about. But yes, that's gonna be a great talk.
So I guess the other part of that I will talk about too is in between the front end and the back end, as a developer, again, as someone who writes code, I think you should understand the internet, right? Like there are things on the internet that you should understand, like DNS and IP addresses, and what is the DNS name made up of? How the internet works, right?
Yeah. How do you get Wi-Fi?
Some of the first, those are some of like the first things that you have to learn. So I'll kind of stick that in there, as we're going to assume that you should know that as well. So I have a tweet on this. Again, that's in the newsletter. If you have some thoughts on that, please drop them below. I'd love to hear about that. I got a bunch of replies already, so I've been going through those. So again, I am giving this talk next week at Code on the Beach. Definitely interested in seeing how that goes. Working on that now. Registration is sold out, but if you're going to be there, please come say hi. With that, I wanted to show a quick demo that I was working on for this week, and it was just something that I did in the past that I realized I shouldn't be doing anymore, and there's a much easier way to do it. So in the essence of full stack, in this case, I go through a progression in this talk of, let's create a backend Spring Boot application. Let's create a separate front-end application written in whatever framework you're using. That front end is going to call a REST API in Spring Boot. The next progression of that is hey, I don't need these to be separate apps. I'm working on this by myself. I want everything in one app. I want to have a single deployable jar. The way that we do that is we use a couple Maven plugins to basically build the front-end project and then copy those files into the static folder. So now when the application is run, it's really just an index page with some JavaScript and CSS, right? So that is what's going to get served up. So when we do that, at the end of the day, we're just creating this single jar that we can now take and deploy to the cloud, wherever that may be. And that we have that one single unit, one single deployable jar. When we're developing, though, I still have like these two applications, right? I have a Spring Boot application that I can come in and run. So if I were to run this application, I can do that. In the past, I would then load up a terminal, right, and go into, say, my front end, and then I can run like npm run dev, which starts up the front end application. So not a huge deal. I mean, that's how you work with two separate applications. But I was like, I'm tired of doing this. There's got to be a better way. And fortunately, there is. So at least in IntelliJ, well, let's talk about from a scripting standpoint first. First, you can write a script to do this, right? Because at the end of the day, all we're doing is running our Spring Boot application. And then I'm saying in parallel, go ahead and run npm run dev. When you run npm run dev, it expects you to be in the root of the JavaScript project. I'm not. So I'm saying, hey, the prefix for that is source front end. And hey, also, I want you to open up a browser because I'm going to go to localhost 8080 and view the front end.
Wait, hold on one second. I want to pause and ask a question. When you put that and, that says run in parallel?
It does.
And the ampersand says run after. Right? Wait for that to finish and then do. Okay.
Yep. You don't really have to. In this case, you don't really have to do that. You could do this because once the hot module replacement on the front end kicks in, it's going to tell the browser to like reload anyway. But yes, this only works on Mac and Linux. This isn't a Windows thing. There is some npm packages for Windows to make this work similar. But yes, this says parallel. This says after.
Interesting. Okay.
Okay, so I could run that. I'm not going to. It works, I promise you. Another thing you can do is you can go into your configurations here and you can create a new run configuration. So we have the Spring Boot run configuration, which starts up our Spring Boot app. But what I want to do is I want to start the Spring Boot app first. Then I want to go ahead and start the front-end application and open up a browser. So what you can do is come in here and add a new configuration for npm. And in that npm, you're basically going to point to your package.json. So I'm pointing to the source front-end package.json. The command I'm running is run. The script I'm running is dev. Now, again, if you're not sure what that is, in the kind of front-end world, when we have a package.json, these are the scripts that are available to us. So npm run, and then whatever this script name is. So these are the three scripts that I can run. So with that, I can go ahead and say I want to npm run dev. And you can also do this before launch. And this before launch is really the key. So what I'm doing here is I'm saying I want to launch the web browser. Launch the web browser. And if you hit this plus button, you have all these different things that you can kind of add as like a new task. One of those tasks is run another configuration. that other configuration is the Spring Boot configuration that we've already set up, or that was created for you when you hit that play button and run your application. So now I'm saying, when I run this script, I want you to run npm run dev on the front end, launch the web browser, and run Spring Boot, right? So now when I'm in here and I want to go ahead and start up my front end, launch a browser, and my back end at the same time, I can just go ahead and run this single script. I have a browser open, and it should be up and running, and it's not. Let's find out what's going on. So something didn't start. Promise, this just worked yesterday. Huh. Oh, I know what's going on. Sorry. I thought that was it. So there's that. Oh, that is, why is that running? Okay, so that's running the Spring Boot application. That's good to know. Huh. This was just working yesterday. Power of live coding. Let's just try the script real quick. So that's running. Yeah, so now you can see the front end stuff, the back end. And if we hit that, there's our application. Huh, let's try stop that. Huh, I'm not sure what was going on there, but
I was there more mistakes maybe. Yeah, we'll come back to it.
Yeah,
no worries.
Live code. But you can run the script, or you can simply go ahead and write a run configuration to do that. Let's just see. There's probably a setting here that I have wrong. Page, activate tool window. Okay, but maybe this is it. Allow parallel run. But in any sense, then you can go ahead and stop it from here. It stops both the Spring Boot app and the NPM app, and you come back in and run it, and there's our application. So this is the front end application getting started, and then the Java, the Spring Boot application getting started. So yeah, just something I'm working on for next week. A lot more to talk about as far as that goes. Again, I have, there's going to be some slides where we just kind of give some context as to what we're doing as full stack developers, but a lot of code. I have like 3 or 4 different apps that we're going to write, and so that should be fun. It's an hour talk, and looking forward to it.
Excellent. Excellent. I'd like to do another shout out to Greg. We talked about testing slices. Greg Turnquist on the Spring team has been doing a ton of amazing content. And he's got some good stuff. We should definitely bring him on the show. Maybe
we are actually going to bring him on the show. He is going to be our next guest. We need to figure out the time because, again, I will be out next week. So we either need to talk to him and see if we could squeeze him in later this week, or
that sounds great. Let's do that.
Yeah. Let's see what he can do. He said he'd be open to anything. So
awesome. Well, we talked about some stuff.
Yeah.
Does anybody have questions? Office hours is office hours. Bring your questions. We can talk about anything. I'll say it again. We don't always have the answers. Between the two of us, we know quite a bit. But we both have Slack, and we have people that have the answers, and we're here for you. I like the way Josh said it. We're here in your service.
I was going to tweet this out last night, and I just got caught up doing something. But I was going to say, one of my favorite things about working here is Slack, and just the number of channels that we have, of all the Spring team engineers having discussions around something that they're working on or an issue that they came across. Just being a fly on the wall of VMware has been one of my favorite parts. So we can ask them those questions.
Yes, indeed. And if we don't get any questions, that's okay. You know how to get a hold of us. We have the Spring community. We have Stack Overflow. We have Gits, emails. However, bring your questions. We are here to help.
Yeah, let's talk about that. The Spring community. If you are not signed up already, look for the Spring Developers community on Twitter. I'm going to try and start answering questions from here. I answered one of DaShaun's questions on a YouTube tutorial, but this is a great place to kind of ask some questions, and we'll see if we can't get them answered. I don't have any specific to talk about right now, but yeah, a lot of great questions in here. Over 2.2 thousand members, so cool to see. Great place to kind of get the discussion going.
Yeah.
All right. So that's okay. No questions. I guess nobody's hungry.
That's okay.
You don't have to.
I like this Tuesday time slot. Hopefully that works. We had quite a few people here today. Thank you all for coming.
Yep.
I would like to do another one later this week.
Let's talk to Greg, see if we can get him on, talk a little Spring data. We don't talk about Spring data. We can talk about every week. There's just so much involved in that project. So I'd love to talk to Greg about that and his work on Spring data. He does so much work there, and all the content that he's created for YouTube and his live stream. So it'll be a good conversation.
All right. Well, this has been wonderful.
All right. Yeah. With that, we will see you in the next episode. We hope you have a really good week. And as I like to say, as always, happy coding, friends.